Welcome to This Team is Killing Us, a podcast about what the Carolina Panthers do to good people. She is Lauren Brownlow. I am Demetri Lauren. And Lauren, what is killing me today is actually outside of the Panthers. We are on day 3 of conversation about Shedeur Sanders, a quarterback that I don't think is worth this much conversation. I mean, what happened to him in the draft is absurd, but good God, like no quarterback in this class was good enough to be talking about for 4 days.
Well, you know, when he gets tweeted about by a certain someone, I don't think that helps. And I actually wasn't sure what to make of. You didn't? Because I was actually like, oh no. Because to me, I mean, I wondered if NFL owners would take that either as like a sign into action of like, hey, go do this, or if they looked at that and were like, yeah, we don't need this in our lives right now. Like now that he's involved, like now it's just gonna blow up. And I think that I mean, he was literally asked about it today. Like, yeah, I mean, I thought one of his spokespeople was,
I thought about this a lot. Like, certainly, I totally got Sanders sliding today too. I did not think. Now, to be fair, I don't think Cam Ward is a day 1 quarterback either. If you are, I think anybody that thinks they got their franchise quarterback in this draft will be doing this same dance in 2 years. But that being said, sliding to day 3, like clearly there is something going on here. I don't think it was necessarily collusion. I think he turned a lot of dudes off in his interview process. However, I will say this. I think when you are having the same football takes as Donald Trump, it's time to reassess how much you actually know ball.
Well, you know what? Well, the thing is, you know what the dude said? He's like, well, the president tweeted about it, and then he was picked a few rounds later. So I think that speaks for itself, acting like that was triumphant. And everyone was like, guys.
All right. Well, let's dive into the Carolina Panthers. What has stood out to me, Lauren, is there's no consensus about this draft. Usually, I think we have an idea of, was this a good draft? Was this a bad draft? So just by Lauren Brownlow standards, did the Panthers win the draft this year?
I'm happy with it. I was pretty happy with it. I mean, there are a few minor things I could quibble with, like the trading up at one point. One of the trade ups, I was kind of like, ooh, I don't know. But I also look. I've been telling
for the record, so people know. I think they stuck at 8.
4th round one.
And then traded up for each of their next 3 picks in different forms or fashions, but they traded up for each of their next 3 picks.
And they didn't cost themselves a ton to do it necessarily, but there was one of the trades that I was like, looks like you gave up a little much there, whereas one just seemed more like a pick swap, so I was kind of like, okay, whatever.
The one you are talking about that felt like a little much
one, I think,
was in the 3rd round when they moved up, giving up their 3rd round and one of their 5th round picks. You're right, like that stood out to me too. That seemed like a chunk.
And look, I think part of that is because of what they did in the beginning. And I think that kind of set the table for everything they did after that. Because, it all started with drafting Tyrell McMillan, which I have been saying, I was on record with saying, of the offensive players they could pick, he's the only one that wouldn't make my tummy hurt. And part of it's because, I watched enough of him to really like him. I mean, he's super fun. He's a dynamic player. He's, to have a big receiver with great hands, it's like, yes, tell me more, please. Yes, I'm all in on this. And he's fast enough. He's not like a speed demon, but he's plenty fast. That's the type of guy that can really be a game changer, both in terms of his size and his ability to hang on to the football. And so I just think and the fact that Bryce wanted it and they were willing to pull the trigger on it. Frankly, like the fact that Dan Morgan is kind of ballsy enough to just do that, knowing what their defense looks like, but just saying, I mean, I can't tell you how many drafts I've looked at after the fact. I don't know if I'm the only person who does this, maybe, but that I look back and I go, oh man, that wide receiver I now love was right there, and they maybe got a guy that maybe he lasted a couple years and flamed out, or maybe he didn't even last that long, or maybe he was a starter, but you're like, man, I'd rather have that guy. And I think so that in that way for me, I was happy with the pick. It made me a little nervous initially, but at the same time seeing, their initial target doesn't even get drafted until like 7 or 8 picks later anyway. So it's not like immediately he was pounced on, and but he was drafted by the Falcons, which I don't love. I don't love having a dude that you were supposed to draft in the same division now mad at you. Don't like that. Dude, like, but yeah, I mean, other than that, like, and I liked the way it played out. He went right at pass rusher after that, addressed some other needs. But I've liked a few more defensive backs, perhaps to have been considered. Yep, big yep. Little panicky about that spot. Everything else, I feel good about those.
Okay, so you hit on a lot that is worth circling back to. I will say the headline of what you were saying at the end is kind of what stood out to me. You wrote a great piece Monday for OG fans touting Dan Morgan's dedication to drafting the best player available. Like you gave him credit for the ballsiness of sticking to that strategy. And I agree with you. It is ballsy. I agree with you that I like a GM that is always thinking about what this is in the future and not just what do we need today. That being said, I do want to understand better the balance of needs versus best available. I think it was the next day when they talked about the Tet McMillan pick, they justified it by saying kind of what I'd been saying all along, even though I thought they were going to go pass rusher all along. There are so many good pass rushers in this draft. And they looked at the wide receiver class and said, after Tet, there's a huge drop off. Right. So in that context, it makes more sense. But there is, as you look at this class, there is so much of a dedication to not drafting for need. You mentioned you would have liked to have had more defensive backs. Like, I thought they waited so long that in a draft with a lot of safeties that could start right away, they didn't get any of them.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like, people like a lot of the upside with Ransom, for sure, it seems like, from what I was reading.
Yeah, but he plays the position the same way as Mooring does. Like, I loved, so look, I thought if I really like Malachi Starks a lot, but I didn't think they were going to take a safety in the first round. So I'd kind of zeroed in on Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State. He was there when they picked in the third round. I'm flabbergasted they didn't take that guy.
Yeah, I think the thing about it that there's trouble, and this all, by the way, it all goes back to the Bryce trade in 23 because they didn't have a second, so it was like they essentially the Bears had their second, and who did they draft? Luther Burden.
They turned into Luther Burden. I honestly, I think I'd said this on the podcast. I know I told you. I think Burden is more talented than Tet. I think Tet has more physical tools and certainly
don't call him Tet. He doesn't like that.
Oh, does he not? I had no idea.
No,
okay, we'll stick with T-Mac, which Dan Morgan was calling him in every video I saw.
He likes that.
Yeah, I think he is more talented than T-Mac. I think T-Mac has more physical tools that complement what the Panthers already have better. But imagine if they had that pick and Burden was sitting there, what they could have done in the first round.
Right. I mean, I could see that. But at the same time, look, the Panthers have – I'm not saying that Burden is going to be bad or anything. Mm-hmm. I don't know that. I'm just saying that I would rather them draft based on what they know someone can do than – you know what I mean? And T-Mac, I'm trying to make it feel good.
I know, especially because of our generation. We know
right
Tracy McGrady is T-Mac.
Yeah, well, that too. But I'm trying – like, I really do like him a lot. And I just – maybe it's just I do tend to somewhat be biased towards dudes that I think that I really enjoyed watching. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just my lizard brain.
No, he was undeniably fun, and he is undeniably like I love the idea because you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago as we were talking about the progression of Bryce and XL together. That when Bryce comes back from being benched, you start to realize that he actually, when it looks like he might be overthrowing a guy, is putting it where XL can get the ball, the defender covering him cannot. Like, boy, add Tet McMillan and T-Mac into that mix, and it's going to be really advantageous.
Yeah, I agree, and a lot of praise has been given to his route running and stuff, and so I think that he'll be able to adjust and do that, and they should be able to get a chemistry. And look, the fact that Bryce wanted him and they picked him is that's I feel like that's telling. It's telling in a lot of ways. I think it puts Xavier on notice a little bit. Which is why I was thinking it wasn't going to happen, by the way, because it's not like he didn't show some promise, but those dropsies, Usually it takes the Panthers several years to kind of wise up to the dropsies a little bit and to go, okay, we need to address, like, this guy isn't going to get over it. So it's weird to me to see them be like, okay, this might be an issue. Let's get one other one just so we're sure.
Look at the way the wide receiver depth chart began last year with Jonathan Mingo still pretty high on the depth chart. But so I'm glad you brought up Bryce, because I do think it is worth asking what this means now. I mean, look, he is the quarterback of an NFL franchise. Usually the quarterback gets some deference that other positions, do not. But given the rocky road to let's say the level of confidence this team has in him now, I frankly am surprised and wonder if this is a turning of the page for, let's say, Bryce's power in Carolina.
Yeah, maybe. And I think it can only help, I would hope, it can only help his confidence going forward that this is what happened and that he even felt good enough in the first place to comfortable enough to, call them up and be like, hey, look, we never know, you've even mentioned it in the lead up to the draft. We don't know how much of it was a misdirect too. Whenever they were talking about defensive players, and we didn't know which was the misdirect and whatever else. And so we weren't sure.
Did you see, oh shoot, who's the guy that just married Alyssa Lang from the SEC network? Sycamore, is it Trevor Sycamore? On his podcast, he was like laughingly bemoaning the fact that, like, how does someone lie to Kay Adams? Kay Adams is so nice. What business does Dave Canales have lied to Kay Adams about the draft? I mean, that is something that I've tried to get across, whether it is when we started this show a couple of years ago or just writing about sports media stuff. Every draft insider has a long list of sources in their phone, and during the draft season, every single one of those sources has incentive to lie to the draft insider. So I definitely think Bryce swayed this. I would not be surprised if Bryce swayed it at the quote-unquote last minute, like not like right before they were making the pick, but in the last few days. Maybe it was the idea that, okay, we can get good value in the second round for a pass rusher. Let's give our quarterback that vote of confidence. Let's give the quarterback the weapon he thinks he needs. And by the way, Bryce and T-Mac, I guess, played together in some camp settings in Southern California. So they did have a little bit of a relationship that sort of plays into this. But I do wonder if, like, maybe Dave Canales was not lying to Kay Adams. Maybe at that moment, the plan was defense all the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe he didn't know, because technically it's supposed to be Dan Morgan taking making that call, and hey, maybe Dan can just blame Bryce later if it goes poorly. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, it's a tough one for me because look, it's not like I dislike Jalen Walker. I didn't. Mm-hmm. It's just it did feel like I made the comparison in my column probably a little more artfully than I might try to do now, but it felt a little bit like eating your vegetables, which, like, you do have to do to live, but it's not as fun as eating a sheet cake,
Right.
And we all need self-care. So, it felt more like dynamic and potential. It didn't let's put it this way. Did it feel like it could help and potentially be a building block? Sure. But did it feel like a game changer? Did it feel like, oh, this is the thing that could make a big difference on this side of the football? Not as much as the McMillan pick, So that's one reason why I think it appealed to me so much.
Yeah, I mean, and I hear you. Going back to the Bryce of it. Well, actually, let's tie both of these things that we've been talking about together. Bryce's power, the power dynamic, I guess, and also Dan Morgan's desire to get best for the team as opposed to need. I do wonder what sort of message this sends about, moving forward, be damned. Bryce is going to get what he wants, because, like, I would have said pass catcher is a distant number 3 in needs coming into this draft. Yeah. And again, Dan Morgan proudly does not draft for need. I mean, look at last year's draft when we both thought they had to get a offensive lineman early, and they did not take one at all. In the draft.
And it ended up working out.
It ended up being okay.
Like, so that's So
I don't want to doubt the guy. I don't want to doubt the guy, but the secondary thing is such a like I don't understand what you're doing here, and I wouldn't be upset if, maybe no one loses confidence in Bryce, right? But certainly there are some people that have a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth, probably on the
Yes.
defensive side of the ball, not the offensive side of the ball, when you hear this is what the quarterback wanted, so this is what we did.
Yeah, maybe so. But at the same time, like, then do better. I don't know. No, I mean,
that's fair.
A lot of them are doing their best. I know. But it's more just like we were in panic mode at this point, and I did have to remind myself of that too. I saw it in the rundown, and I was like, yeah, I was in full panic mode at this point. Like, well, how are they going to fix it? And they figured out a way to fix it. But it was through a combination of guys already on the roster, and they added a few more, but it was like, okay, is that enough? And I don't know that even in free agency, there was enough. I mean, how many are on the roster currently? It's not many.
What are we talking about? Defensive backs?
Safety? Safety specifically.
Safety, I believe, if I remember right, they even with taking Ransom, I think they still have to get another one just to meet roster minimum requirements.
Literally. And so like that has me, that's the only spot for me that I'm kind of like, oh. Yeah. And look, they could have done some things differently at numerous spots. You could argue they signed a few pass rushers in free agency to bolster things up, and maybe they only go with one of those pass rushers and get instead of going with two, but they did at least get a good value, I think, with the pick after McMillan and getting a guy that everyone thought would go in the first round, or at least like the latter part of the first round. So they got a value there in that. And essentially you get what ends up being a first round pass rusher plus then you get another one. So it's like, okay, you got double the pass rush, but then you leave the draft with one safety and he's a run stopper primarily. Yep. And I just have visions in my head of receivers running wide open.
Yeah, especially when you look later on in the draft and they get Cam Jackson, who is a big old piece, but I never thought of him as a real difference maker at Florida. A and B, you invested so much there in free agency that felt like a place you could have taken another.
Right. Well, I looked at the roster to sort it by weight.
Yeah.
For that part of my column, because I do love the big beefy boys. I do. I love watching them play. I appreciate their art. I appreciate what those guys do. And I was like, wow, there are a lot of tackles on this route. They were like two ends on the roster, and felt like 7, 8, 9 tackle. I don't remember. And I'm like, okay, well, it was a little confusing in terms of, I guess it is a nice long-term depth piece, and clearly he's very good. But it was a little bit especially when you put it that way, but I did get excited at the big beefy boy of it all, but still, yeah.
All right. You mentioned the message that the draft sends. Certainly there are people now in the Panthers organization that are facing more pressure than they were this time last week. And let's start with Xavier Leggett. I don't think the guy is in any danger of losing his roster spot, but it would be hard if I were XL not to feel like a message was sent that we don't think you are capable of being the X receiver on this team.
Or at least we're not sure, right?
Yeah.
We don't know. And I think, that's what surprised me a little bit, because I was like, wow. But at least at the same time, they're looking to act now. I think they understand to a degree how important this window is for Bryce. Maybe they understand that they can only fix the defense, but so much. And this team's going to have to outscore a lot of people. So they need to because we saw, look, you could say the same thing about drafting a running back, which also was kind of like, did you get Rico Dowdle? Why? Yeah. Why are we doing that?
Especially drafted a running back that has had his share of injury issues.
Oh God, show Dan Morgan a running back with an injury history and he'll fall straight in love. That was, to be fair, his injury history is a little different. Especially,
for sure.
At least, ribs are a little different than the ACL situation.
For sure. But let me be as blunt as I can about picking Trevor Etienne.
I know where you're going with this.
I hated it. I hated that pick. It was, to your point, they just signed Rico Dowdle. They keep telling us that Jonathan Brooks needs a year, but will be back. I just did not get it.
Especially at that spot where, there's other talent to be had there and
For
more
sure.
positions of need. Like we said, like a 4th round on that, I just was kind of like, I didn't love it. I was not as enthusiastic for sure. I guess they really felt like they don't want to be caught in a situation where one of those 2 backs goes down and they have nothing else behind him. But at the same time, like you can sign a guy in free agency to.
For sure. Absolutely. This is what the undrafted free agent class should be for, that emergency situation. Another pick I didn't like puts another rookie from last year under a little bit of pressure, but not just Jatavian Sanders.
I was going to say, we disagree on which one it puts under pressure.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't also put Tommy Tremble under pressure.
I think he's on the most, yeah.
I don't love the Mitchell Evans pick. I don't have anything against Mitchell Evans. Certainly the highlights are incredible, but it felt like one of these things to me. All the talk about the Panthers needing another tight end always felt like we are talking about super high end because this team needs another high end pass catcher. I didn't think they needed a tight end just to add a tight end.
I don't think it was just that necessarily. I think what they wanted was ideally for them, like the best of both worlds type of guy in terms of like, we want a guy that can catch passes and we want a guy that can block well. And from what I was reading, there are people who feel that he's already a better blocker than Trimble, which raised my eyebrows, and I was kind of like, oh, interesting. Cause you've got, I think, if he can stay healthy, the playmaker element of the tight end spot in Jatavian Sanders. So that's why I feel like he's not on as much notice as a Tommy Tremble, who literally sees a tight end drafted from his alma mater that does the same things he does best, but better, allegedly. Like that's, and he's, Tommy's on a 2-year deal. Like it's not like he's on a long-term contract with this team right now. If I'm Tommy Tremble, I'm pissed off. Like, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like from my alma mater, like this is personal to me at this point. And so,
I mean, I would guess now it is totally possible. And we've seen this not just in Carolina, in other places, at other positions where draft position be damned. If you go into camp and you're the best 1 or 2 guys at that position, you are going to be heavily in the rotation. That may happen with Mitchell Evans. However, they just signed that new deal with Tommy Tremble. I think this is sending you the message that Tremble is fine for this year, but this year is a placeholder. And that second year doesn't really mean much. Like it's pretty easy to void and move on from.
I mean, it could have just been a situation where they really liked him in the draft process, thought, okay, that, if the Tremble thing doesn't work out, that's an option moving forward. And we're like, he's right there. It's the 6th round. Like, why not do it? I think it could have been as simple as that, as opposed to like going into the draft with a plan of like, we have to have tight end, but a lot of people were saying that the Panthers needed a tight end in this draft, which you and I disagreed with. I didn't necessarily agree with it. But it'll be interesting to see. I mean, at least if they got a tight end, it didn't feel like they got this tight end just to get one. To me, it felt like they got one that they really liked and saw good value in, that he was still there. And like people really loved it. Like people outside of us really loved the pick. So that definitely that doesn't necessarily mean it's correct, obviously, as we know, but like at the same time, like that's what made me look into it a little bit more and be like, okay, well, let me see why. And to see that he can catch. Now, the one thing that did give me some hesitation is that it doesn't seem like he's a red zone threat as much. He had like 3 touchdowns, but clearly he was more involved in the pass game than Trimble has been, even though we saw some improvement there. And so, but you're right. Like they just signed Trimble to this contract. So why do that? I mean, maybe they think they'll bring this guy along, but at the same time, like you said, like to me, defense is a top priority. And it was surprising. The 6th round, I care less about. So it's kind of like one of those, certainly the 4th round pick with Etienne is that's more relevant, I think, in terms of the defensive players you would have liked to have seen drafted. If you want to take a flyer on a tight end that you like in the 6th round, it doesn't bother me quite as much as taking a running back in the 4th.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, I just thought in the draft, like all the talk about the Panthers and tight end, I thought, honest to God, I solely thought is Tyler Warren in play at 8? Because I thought if you take Warren,
I'm so glad they didn't do that.
Well, here's my thing with Warren, right? If you're taking Warren, it's not because he's a tight end; it's because he's a high-end pass catcher. Like that's right. That's all I ever really thought was in play. So I'm just surprised by it. The other name that I think undeniably faces a little bit more pressure today than he did this time last week is EjiroEvero. Now, certainly he can counter that he needs more bodies in the secondary.
I mean, literally, quite literally.
Literally, yeah.
Literally. Dan, we don't have a roster min at the moment, my dude.
But like, he was probably let down by the pick at number 8 and still got everything he wanted out of a pass rush in this draft.
For sure. So
I mean, he got just to let people know, at least what I have seen,
yes.
Suggests that Scorton is going to line up at end. Nick Scorton, the pass rusher from Texas A&M, who they drafted in round 3, and Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss is going to line up as an outside linebacker. So they got 2 edge rushers basically in this draft.
Yeah, and that's it's a big deal, and I think that's. They just better hope, I suppose, that they get to the quarterback before he throws it. Because
right.
The problem is going to be on that back end where
it's
there may be no one there.
It's what makes the Cam Jackson pick, I think, a little more valuable, and probably some of these defensive tackles they added in free agency as well is you got to have, if what we are looking at Umanmielen and saying we like is the speed, well, you need guys to eat up blockers to make sure that he is not derailed on his way to the quarterback, right? And even Scorton, I think, is going to be relied on to eat up some blockers as well for that pass rush.
And they've got a load of big, beefy boys in there. They've got like 3 players, I think, over 325 from what I counted, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes. That's me. More weight. Let's do it.
Maybe it's not fair to say Evero is under more pressure now than he was this time a week ago, because I think the dude is feeling pressure. I think there's just no way he doesn't know that he can't have another year like the last 2 he's had.
Well, and what I just hope for his sake is that basically what I fear could be happening, although I don't know, is like I said in the beginning, which is that okay, we're going to make this offense as good as possible so that they can score a ton of points so that people can feel better about Bryce, even if that costs us something on the defense, which bold strategy.
And it is costing you on the defense so far.
And that would definitely that would put Evero in a no-win position yet again. At that
for
point.
Sure.
I mean, literally with the safety situation being what it is, I just look. I will let it play out a little bit. We still have a ways to go before the season starts, and who knows who else they'll be able to add. It is a little bit easier, technically speaking, to replace safeties in the NFL than it is an offensive lineman, which is why I was so panicky at this point last season.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to not have any other options and to be at this point, after the draft and literally not even have the roster minimums worth of safeties, you just kind of go,
yeah.
So what is the plan exactly? Can we get more info? I'd just like to know that someone's aware of Did anyone know of these? Maybe they just forgot. And if I'm Evero, I'm like, you got to be freaking kidding me, because it seems like he could be made to sort of I don't know. I hope he's not being put in a situation where this team doesn't have the record that they would like to have, but Bryce puts up great stats and the offense puts up great stats, and then the defense is just thrown under the bus yet again. Thus, Evero is thrown under the bus yet again.
Here's the other thing.
Yeah.
Even if he is, let's say what plays out is exactly what you say. Even if he is not thrown under the bus in the sense that, Dan Morgan says and Dave Canales says, this is the big change we're making. We're moving on from Evero. Even if he is offered to come back, if you're EjiroEvero, knowing what your reputation was before you got here, how much longer do you want to keep doing this with this team?
I mean, yeah, that's the question, right? Because we don't even know the conversations that went on behind the scenes. But if I'm Evero, I would certainly want some assurances of okay, so
absolutely,
what's going, I mean, if I were him, I might even think about leaving now. But you can't really do that,
right?
I suppose. But I'd be screw this. I'm not going to be made to hold the bag for this and be responsible, because he'll be the one that gets blamed. And everybody would be like, well, he had a chance. They were terrible last year, and the context, no one in the NFL takes the time to add the context of well, they barely have functioning safeties for some reason.
So this time last year, actually, that's not fair. It wasn't this early, but Panthers signed 10 undrafted free agents this year. As the season went on, JalenCoker ends up being the one that all 31 other teams probably kicked themselves at least a little bit, knowing they could have had him at any point, and he fell to the Panthers completely undrafted, and they were able to sign him on a dime. Lauren, that will be Ryan Fitzgerald this time next year. I love picking up the Florida State kicker. He is not the kicker that I liked the most, but that's just because I was not as familiar with him as Caden Davis out of Ole Miss. The dude was perfect all of last season, including 5 of 5 from beyond the 50-yard line. It was time for Eddie Pinheiro to go. I don't think the guy that they signed was really signed to replace him. It was a flyer to have a kicker on the roster. I love this addition.
Yeah, I mean, it seems good. If I ever don't like a kicker pick, it's always for irrational reasons, because kickers don't always follow the laws of rationality.
Oh, totally.
Either. So when I was like, "Ooh, I don't know why," like Florida State kicker, I think I was just thinking of like their last kicking sensation.
Yeah.
Roberto Aguayo, who was drafted. To be fair, he was drafted way earlier than he should have been. It wasn't his fault, but he was great in college, like dominant.
Right.
And then he gets to the NFL and is garbage. And so it does make me a little nervous. But hey, if you're a Florida State player that actually showed up and tried in a game last year,
very fair.
I feel like you might deserve some credit there. So I'm open-minded to it. Let's just we'll see how it plays out and how he does,
I was looking when I was looking up his stats yesterday. I believe it is a very, very much a product of this year's Florida State team where he was perfect in kicking field goals, but he only kicked 14 of them because Florida State was not often in position to score this season.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Or they had to go for it because they were so far behind or whatever.
Right.
Like they couldn't, I was going to say, I was like, well, he didn't kick that many. That was the other part of it for me was like, they were like, he didn't miss. I'm like, well,
yeah,
I know. That's not to dismiss it, because I know he made some long ones. But yeah, I was a little bit like, well, maybe he needs some more reps.
The Carolina Panthers did sign 2 safeties as undrafted free agents. Hang on, I've lost their names. Here we go. They signed Isaac Gifford out of Nebraska. So, hey, Matt Rule connection. That's got to make you feel good. And then Trevion Thomas out of Arkansas State. Lauren, it's possible one or both of these guys will make the roster, and that is not a good thing.
Well, look, I will say this.
I mean, I'm not telling you I know that they are bad. I'm saying that, the Panthers should not be in this position.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that. But I will say this. There are guys that I think, of the positions to have unfilled, or to have spots that you need somebody to literally to fill body space. Safety is one of those that I'm kind of I'm not saying it's not important. It's very important. So this is not me saying that, but it is just me saying you can find those guys, and you can find some guys that are lesser known quantities, right? That played in some smaller schools sometimes or whatever, that actually are pretty good, but just weren't going to get a lot of attention or draft evaluation or whatever it is, because there's so many, there's literally so many of them, And so that in that way, I'm kind of okay, let me just hashtag trust the process a little bit with I'm trying, but yeah.
Devil's advocate here. I know this was a different front office, so it's not an apples to apples comparison, but Jeremy Chin was exactly what you are talking about. Lower or very small school by NFL draft standards, recognized by everybody as this dude can play, and they spent a 3rd round pick on him. They prioritized going to get him. They didn't wait for that guy to fall to them and see what they had. All of the safeties that, I sort of viewed as that day one starter. You're right. They were all from big schools. Maybe there is a diamond in the rough thing going on here, but it just seems to me that this is a gamble at a position, not where you can't afford to take a gamble, but you didn't have to, basically.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's funny. I was mostly high on the draft overall, so I was kind of feeling good about it. But as we talk it out, you and I'm just kind of Etienne did not need to go. I mean, I didn't love the pick initially anyways, but Etienne did not need to go there. They could have drafted another safety, like at literally any point on the board. And you would have to think that they had some board of safeties ranked some. I mean, maybe the ones that were left were valued in a different round. And so Dan was like, I'm not reaching for that here. I don't know. Like, I don't know how his draft process works.
And that's the other part too. Like, I think once you get to day 3, there's no conventional wisdom on a lot of these guys, right?
Yeah.
Like, I thought Malachi Moore, obviously I'm really familiar with him because of Alabama, because he played at Alabama. I thought in time he could develop into a starter, but I also thought he was like a 6th round guy, and I think he went in the 4th. And that's when you just kind of have to remind yourself, like, by the time you get to day 3, it is all about these dudes. I don't want to say just feelings, but it's all about their evaluation. Vibes. In a lot of cases, it is about vibes. So nobody is overdrafted or underdrafted by the time we get to day 3. Let's talk about what happens now for the Carolina Panthers, because it's not like they finished the draft on Saturday and took some time off. Dan Morgan and crew have been busy with a lot of things, including we have signed a sanitation worker to play wide receiver after, was it 5 years in the NFL? Hunter Renfrow had an unscheduled year off and now is back with the Carolina Panthers. Lauren Brownlow, on a personal level, I hate Hunter Renfrow. I hate him so much because he looks like, he looks like a Chick-fil-A manager and just caused so much pain for the Carolina Panthers, or excuse me, for the Alabama Crimson Tide.
I was like, not yet.
Yeah, now, that's the thing, Lauren. He's obviously really good at football, but I only know him as a man who causes pain. I'm not ready to accept this quite yet.
I get it. But look, people, I know on Blue Sky, there's at least one person in our mentions saying, I'm excited to hear you guys talk about this. I had not remembered as well the implications of such discussion for your Alabama purposes.
Remember that I sort of made the transition from rock radio to sports radio in Columbia, South Carolina. So I do have an affinity for the Gamecocks, and he made them hurt too. Like, I mean, he really victimized SEC defenses while he was at Clemson.
Yes, he did. And look, I mean, I figure, like, why not? You know, it's not like you had to give up much to get him. See if it works out.
I mean, you really probably didn't have to give up anything, right? I mean, like, he's probably coming in on a veteran minimum salary. Easy to cut if he doesn't make the roster. And if he does make the roster, hey, look, you got to steal.
Well, and I like it too, because remember some of the names that were being brought in last year, although to be fair, one of those was JalenCoker. And I'm sitting here like, what? Holy cross. What is it? So, but at least, like, these are guys that have experience. And one thing that really struck me about the draft class in general was like how Power 5 / SEC / like CFP, college football playoff team heavy it was. Like,
well, I mean, is part of that though about the fact that these conferences, or what, the SEC is 16 teams, and that's the smaller of the 4 power conferences now. I mean, is part of that just about when everyone is so huge, it's hard not to pick guys from those conferences?
Maybe a little bit, but like there wasn't. I mean, you don't usually see that from Panthers drafts or I think individual teams drafts. And maybe there's more of that than I thought, but maybe you see a lot of, like, when you look at the Eagles roster, I remember a lot of people pointing that out of like how many of those guys played in like national title games or whatever, or like played at those top tier programs. And so maybe there's a degree of like, oh, well, that seemed to work out for them.
It's a copycat league, right? We say
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So Hunter Renfrow is signed to join the receiving corps, at least through camp. They've got to go. The Panthers have to go find a safety in free agency. And what I wonder, you don't ever want to assume a team is looking towards next year's draft, especially the day after the current draft. But like, do you go get a guy like Julian Blackmon, who is 26 and does not have a team yet? Or do you go get somebody like a Justin Simmons, who is on the quote unquote wrong side of 30 and can hold the fort down until you go all in for someone like, say, Caleb Downs out of Ohio State next year? Like, do you view the safety spot at this point as a long-term fix, or do you do what you can to fix it immediately?
I think you got to do what you can to fix it immediately, partially because there's like literally such a low number of them.
Right.
Like, I mean, you don't often see this. I don't remember ever looking at a football roster and seeing that few safeties ever in my life. Like any football roster at any level ever.
I mean, I think the only position group across the NFL that is more shocking than looking at the Panthers safeties is Steelers quarterbacks. I mean, right? Like it is the same level of like, holy shit, what is their plan here?
Right, exactly. And I think like that's right. Like, so for me, I would rather not think about, because you never know where you'll draft or where the person you think you want will be and all that. And you don't want to think about trading up and all that stuff that you might have to do to get to where you want to go. You certainly don't want to have to think about losing enough to be in a position to draft whoever it is that you want either. So, you know, like I don't think you can plan too much for that kind of thing unless it's for quarterback and you know you're going to be bad. So you might as well just lean in. Like, I think that's really the only spot that you could do that with, because that's know you're going to have to pick that guy high. I don't think you tank for a safety, you know,
no,
like
you,
ever.
You certainly don't tank for a safety, although I will like credit where it is due. Even a draft with a Manning that will be in it. Like Caleb Downs is so much better than anyone else in college football. But you're right. You don't tank for a safety, but like, hey, if we tank for a safety, I'm with that for that safety.
To be fair, we don't really know what's going to happen when they let Arch cook. I'm just saying.
That's very true. The other big move, I think this is probably the biggest move, although not unexpected. Ickey Ekwonu's fifth-year option gets picked up. I think that was probably just a matter of time before that happened, but it does make the
imagine if they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, like, then you really are in a holy shit moment of like both tackles are probably gone after next year. And also it really tells you what they think about Ickey. But they saw enough improvement. He's at least going to get one more year. If Moton goes and the Panthers are drafting somewhere, they can take one of the top tackles. And honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know who that would be. Maybe Ickey's not guaranteed to stay on the left side, but I don't think they want to let him go from the roster.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And he did enough. Do I still get a little nervous about him considering what I saw?
Oh, I definitely do. Yeah.
At the same time, like I still feel that way on some level about like Bryce, you know, on some level, because we saw what we saw and you can't unsee that.
Agree.
You know?
No, I think that's totally fair.
It's like, you know, the yips are in there. You just hope they stay buried. And look, did Ickey do some things wrong at times last year? Yeah, but he was much better. To be fair, the bar was very low because he was horrendous the year before, but he was clearly much improved. He was much better, in a much better headspace. And he was very highly regarded coming out of school, not just by the Panthers. So,
agreed.
You know, and I loved him in college. I loved watching him play. I haven't had as many of those like, yes, Ickey moments in the NFL as I, you know, just watching him flatten some dude.
That's a very good point. You've had way more like, hey, good for you moments. Like, way to prove him wrong, kiddo. Right.
You weren't a human turnstile. Yay.
We learned during the draft, this probably is not a huge surprise, but Jadeveon Clowney very much on the block. It does not seem like he will be a Panther next year. It is just a matter of
mildly surprised.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised only because given the amount of people they brought in on the line and our constant discussion about money being fake, either him or Wanham had to go. 1 year left with that much money dedicated to them. One of them was going to have to go.
And look, sorry, Jadeveon, you're elderly. We get it. We're also elderly by NFL standards. So.
I believe in my case, I am 10 years more elderly than Jadeveon Clowney is. And here I am saying, what an old sack of garbage. So Clowney is either going to get cut or, you know, maybe they find a late round trade pick for him, but he does not appear to be part of the roster this year. Lauren Brownlow, we are now at 7 tight ends on the Panthers roster. So I would imagine a bloodbath is coming for that position group.
I know 3. Who are the others? What?
All right. So you have you have Sanders, you have Trimble, you have Evans, who just got drafted. You have the kid who played basketball at Coastal Carolina last year.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about him. Okay.
And then you have 2 dudes on futures contracts who I don't fully understand what futures contracts means. I think it means that no one else can sign them in the offseason. I'm not sure, but either way, like you've got to assume at least 3 of these guys probably are not making it through cut number 1 in camp.
What this says to me is 2 things. One, I would guess some of these guys have some dual usage on special teams.
Oh, for sure.
So that's 1. And then 2, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of 2 tight end sets.
If Evans is what they think he is, like that's a pretty good pairing with Jadavian
Sanders.
Yeah. I mean, this might be a case of you you soft launch the 2 tight end set this year, and then once Evans is in the NFL flow next year could be like, oh man, I mean, you hate to use this comparison because somebody has to be Aaron Hernandez, but it could be the second coming of Gronk and Aaron Hernandez, which was
Does someone have to be Aaron Hernandez?
I mean, when you compare them to that set, I'm not saying you have to be personally Aaron Hernandez.
Got it.